At Easter brunch, I handed my mom a basket my kids had put together. She looked at it and said, "Don't make this a pity show." I smiled, set it on the table, and walked out. 3 days later, my sister texted, "Why did you lock the account? We can't pay." I replied, "Thought you didn't want to show." When my mom showed up furious, I opened the door and said, "I still don't understand why my kids' efforts were insulted like that." They'd spent the entire week with Mark getting the Easter basket ready for my mom. I'd hear them at the kitchen table after dinner, carefully painting pastel eggs, rolling sugar cookie dough, debating which colors looked most like spring. They even tucked in a couple of drawings they made at school, one of all of us standing under a rainbow, another of a giant smiling bunny. Mark had been the one to organize it all, even though he knew from experience that my mom wasn't the easiest person to please. But he wanted the kids to feel involved, to have that sense of giving something special to their grandmother. By the time Easter morning rolled around, the basket looked like something out of a magazine. When we walked into my parents' house, the dining table was set for 10, and there was that smell of baked ham and cinnamon rolls. My dad was in the corner with his newspaper, not looking up, and a few cousins were already there chatting. Jenna, my sister, sat with her little girl, scrolling on her phone. The kids were excited, practically bouncing as they ran up to my mom with the basket in their hands. Mark stood beside me, holding his breath. My mom glanced at it, her eyes moving over the eggs, cookies, and drawings. Then, without missing a beat, she said, "Don't make this a pity show." Mark's shoulders stiffened. My kids froze. I felt all the air in the room shift, that kind of thick silence where everyone pretends not to have heard something, but they definitely did. No one moved. My mom turned away, already busying herself with something on the stove, as if she hadn't just crushed her grandkids' excitement in 2 seconds flat. I took the basket from the kids and set it gently on the table. I smiled, but not out of amusement. It was a tight, deliberate smile, the kind you wear when you're seconds away from saying something you'll regret, but you know you can't, not in front of your children. The rest of the family just stared at their plates or their phones. Mark looked at me. I nodded toward the door. We gathered the kids, said nothing to anyone, and left. We didn't even sit down. The drive home was quiet except for the questions from the back seat. They wanted to know what pity show meant. Mark told them it was just something Grandma said that didn't make sense. I didn't explain further, partly because I didn't have the right words, partly because I was still deciding what to do about it. 3 days later, I got a text from Jenna. "Why did you lock the account? We can't pay." I'd been helping her for months, sending money every few weeks so she could cover rent and daycare for her daughter. After her divorce, she'd been struggling. And while my parents talked a big game about family sticking together, I was the one actually stepping up to make sure she stayed afloat. What she didn't know was that the account I'd been transferring the money to was in my name, and I had just shut it down. I replied, "Thought you didn't want to show." No answer. That evening, there was pounding on my front door. When I opened it, my mom was standing there, her face red, not from the cold, but from pure rage. She didn't even wait for me to invite her in. She started talking rapid fire about how I had no right to abandon my sister, about how Jenna was a single mom and it was my job to make sure she had what she needed. I let her finish her first tirade, watching her the whole time. Mark appeared from the kitchen, drying his hands on a towel, his expression tight. When my mom finally stopped to take a breath, I looked her straight in the eye and told her slowly that I wasn't responsible for supporting Jenna. I'd helped her because I chose to, not because I owed her or my parents anything. I reminded her that when Jenna's ex walked out, it wasn't them making sure she could pay rent or keep the lights on. It was me, month after month, quietly wiring money so she wouldn't end up losing her home. Mark stepped into the hallway and stood beside me. He didn't have to raise his voice. Every word came out steady and deliberate, and the air in the room got heavier with each one. He said it was shameful that my mom could humiliate her own grandkids in front of an entire table of family over something as harmless and kind as a handmade basket, and then have the nerve to show up days later, demanding help from the same people she'd just belittled. My mom didn't like hearing that. She switched tactics almost instantly, trading anger for guilt. She said family was supposed to take care of each other, that Jenna had a young daughter to raise, and that I was throwing away my responsibility as a sister. She painted the whole thing as if I'd just abandoned Jenna out of spite, ignoring the fact that I'd been the only one actually helping her. I told her if she and Dad thought Jenna was such a priority, then they could help her themselves. I'd been carrying that weight for a year while they sat back. never once offering to contribute. Not once. Mark added that this wasn't even about Jenna's needs. It was about control. That my parents had been putting Jenna on a pedestal since we were kids, overlooking every mistake she made, while holding me to impossible standards. He said they still saw me as the one they could lean on for anything, while Jenna stayed the golden one who could do no wrong. That hit a nerve. My mom's eyes narrowed, and the volume started creeping back into her voice. She accused Mark of trying to turn me against the family, said he'd been nothing but trouble since the day we got married, and that I wasn't the woman I used to be because of his influence. She even went so far as to say the kids shouldn't be around Mark so much because he was clearly influencing them the wrong way. That was it. Mark told her she needed to leave. My mom stepped forward instead, like she thought she could intimidate him. She kept talking, calling us selfish, ungrateful, irresponsible. She said she'd never ask for anything again, in that tone that really means the opposite. I walked over to the door, opened it, and told her that she was welcome to visit her grandchildren anytime she could treat them and my husband with respect. Until then, there was nothing else to talk about. She stormed past me, muttering about how she didn't raise me to be like this. She slammed the door so hard the picture frames in the hallway rattled. For the next few days it was quiet. No texts, no calls. Then, one evening, Mark's phone started lighting up with messages from cousins and an aunt we barely talked to. All of them had heard some version of the same story, that Mark was a bad father, that I had changed for the worse since marrying him, and that I'd turned my back on my sister out of sheer pride. The lies were spreading fast, and I knew exactly where they were coming from. The first text came from my cousin Megan, and it started like a casual check-in. She asked if everything was okay, but then slipped in a comment about how she'd heard Mark was keeping the kids from my mom. I told her that wasn't true, but she didn't respond to that part. The next day, my aunt called out of the blue. She's usually the kind to avoid family drama, but I could tell she wasn't calling to chat. She said Mom had been worried sick about me and was telling people she didn't even recognize me anymore. Then she added that there were stories going around about Mark being disrespectful at Easter, about him raising his voice at my mom in front of everyone. I could hear the hesitation in her voice, the kind people have when they half believe what they've been told, but still want confirmation from the source. By the third day, I understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't accidental gossip. My mom was deliberately crafting a version of events where she was the victim. Jenna was the helpless single mom I had cruelly abandoned, and Mark was the outsider who had poisoned me against my own blood. Mark took it personally. He'd never been one for public scenes, and especially hated being misunderstood, but now he was being painted as manipulative and cold by people who hadn't seen him do a single unkind thing. Every night that week, he sat at the kitchen table with his phone in his hand, reading and rereading messages from relatives. Some were just fishing for details. Others were openly siding with my mom. He kept scrolling, until he finally set the phone down like it was too heavy to hold. It didn't stop at calls and texts. My mom moved the whole thing online. She started posting cryptic Facebook statuses, things like, "It's sad when you lose a child to someone else's influence," and "Families should never turn their back on family, no matter what." The comment section was full of relatives speculating, offering prayers, and occasionally dropping passive-aggressive hints that they knew who she was talking about. Then the lies got bolder. I found out from my uncle, who lives 2 states away, that my mom was telling people I had intentionally cut Jenna and her daughter off to punish the family. In her version, there was no insult at Easter, no snide remark to my kids, no history of favoritism toward Jenna, just me, the ungrateful daughter married to the wrong man. What bothered me most wasn't just the damage to Mark's reputation. It was how fast people were willing to believe it. The same people who'd known me for decades were nodding along to a version of events that left out the truth entirely. I realized then that if I stayed quiet, my kids would eventually hear the family's version of the story, that their dad was some cold, controlling person and that their mom had abandoned her sister without reason. That was unacceptable. The next Sunday, I called my mom and told her I'd be coming over. She said fine, in that flat, tight voice that told me she thought she'd won by getting me to initiate contact. But this wasn't a peace talk. I was done with phone calls, vague posts, and whispered half-truths. I was going to say everything directly, clearly, with Mark by my side. And I wasn't leaving until I'd made it impossible for them to twist the story again. I chose Sunday afternoon for a reason. My parents always had people over after lunch, Aunts, uncles, sometimes neighbors. It meant there would be more ears in the room, people who could hear the truth for themselves instead of getting it filtered through my mom. Mark walked in beside me, his chin slightly raised, not in arrogance, but in resolve. We stepped into the living room and found exactly the crowd I'd expected. My mom sitting with Jenna on the couch, my dad in his recliner pretending to watch a game, and two of my aunts sipping coffee. The second we walked in, the room's energy changed. I didn't bother with small talk. I told them we needed to set the record straight. My mom immediately said she didn't see the point if I'd already made up my mind to attack her. I told her this wasn't about attacking anyone. It was about putting an end to the half-truths and gossip that were making their way through the family. I laid it all out. Easter brunch, the basket the kids made, her pity show comment in front of everyone, us leaving without eating a single bite, the text from Jenna about the locked account, her showing up at my door furious that I'd stopped funding my sister's rent and daycare. I explained that I'd done more for Jenna in the past year than anyone else in the room, and that I wasn't going to be treated like an ATM while my own family was treated with disrespect. My mom sat stone-faced, but I could see Jenna start shifting in her seat. Then something I didn't expect. Jenna spoke up. She said she'd appreciated my help after her divorce and never asked my mom to confront me. She said she didn't even know what pity show was supposed to mean and had been embarrassed when she found out what had happened. But she also didn't call out the rumors directly. She left that part hanging, which told me she wasn't ready to push back on Mom fully. Mark stepped forward then. He didn't raise his voice or go for cheap shots. He said it plainly. Our kids are not going to grow up hearing that their father was manipulative or that their mother abandoned her family. If my mother-in-law ever wants a relationship with me, it will be based on respect, not control. That's when one of my aunts chimed in, trying to soften the mood. She suggested we all just agree Easter was a misunderstanding. That's when my mom snapped. She shot up from the couch and started shouting that she could say whatever she wanted in her own home, that I'd overreacted, and that if Mark and I were so sensitive, maybe we should just stay away altogether. Mark didn't even blink. He said, "If that's what you want, we can arrange it." It was meant to be the end of it. But then something happened I'd never seen before. My dad actually spoke up. He said maybe my mom had gone too far and that she should at least apologize to the kids. My mom turned on him like he'd betrayed her, her voice rising so fast the aunts both shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. The room got thick with tension. My mom grabbed her purse and keys and headed for the door. As she passed me, she said I'd regret choosing sides. Jenna followed her, but not before glancing back at me with a look I couldn't read, part sympathy, part warning. When we got home that night, Mark didn't sit down right away. He walked into the kitchen, poured himself some water, and finally said, "She's not done. She's going to find a way to make this worse." He was right. 48 hours later, the next move came. And it wasn't just more rumors. It was calculated, personal, and aimed right at our lives. 2 days after the showdown at my parents' house, Mark's phone rang while he was sorting laundry in the living room. He put it on speaker without thinking, and that's the only reason I heard every word. It was the director of the kids' after-school program, a warm, level-headed woman we'd known for years. But her tone was off. She said she'd received a few concerns about our home life from someone who wished to remain anonymous. According to the caller, Mark was overly controlling, kept the kids from seeing their grandmother for no valid reason, and our home had become tense and unstable since I had cut off financial support to a family member. Mark didn't say much, just thanked her for telling us and hung up. He stared at the phone for a few seconds before looking at me. One word. Mom. It wasn't a guess. The details were too exact. The Easter comment, the money for Jenna, the implication that Mark was the one pulling strings, all the little talking points my mom had been using in her rumor campaign had now been fed to someone in a position to make trouble for us. But there was more. The director mentioned the anonymous caller had said they were a concerned relative. She hadn't given a name, but she'd also let slip that she hoped the kids could maintain a connection to their grandmother despite the tension at home. That line alone was as good as a signature. I was done. That night, I called my mom directly. I told her we'd be coming over tomorrow evening and that she'd better be there. She laughed in that clipped, condescending way she always did when she thought she was in control. Then she said, "If you're coming here to attack me again, don't bother." I told her she didn't have a choice. When Mark and I showed up the next evening, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Just my mom and dad at the kitchen table. No TV on, no dinner smells. My dad looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I didn't sit. I told her flat out that I knew about the call to the program and that if she ever interfered in our parenting again, she'd never see her grandkids. Not at birthdays, not at holidays, not even by accident. Mark told her that going after our parenting wasn't just petty, it was dangerous, and that she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. My mom tried to play innocent, leaning on that old line about how people talk and you can't control what gets back to you. But when I asked her directly twice if she made the call, she didn't deny it. She just looked away and said, "I was only trying to help them." My dad shifted in his chair, muttered something about, "This has gone too far," and then got up and left the room. That told me all I needed to know. I told her this was it. From that moment forward, I wasn't responsible for Jenna's bills. I wasn't her backup plan, and I wasn't going to pretend she hadn't tried to damage my marriage and reputation. I also told her that the only reason she hadn't been completely cut off that night was because my kids deserved to decide for themselves one day if they wanted a relationship with her. She didn't say a word as we left. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Jenna. I didn't know how bad it was until now. We need to talk. Something about the wording, until now, made me pause. It implied she'd learned something recently. Maybe not from my mom, maybe from somewhere else, but it also meant she'd been watching this unfold in silence. And I wasn't sure if she was reaching out because she wanted peace or because she'd realized things weren't going her way anymore. Either way, I was going to find out. I agreed to meet Jenna at a diner halfway between us. Not one of our regular places, but one of those quiet roadside spots where the coffee is always hot and the booths are just far enough apart that nobody can eavesdrop without looking obvious. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth, hair tied back, hands locked around a mug like she was trying to warm herself from the inside out. She didn't smile when she saw me. We didn't bother with small talk. She started with, "I didn't know how far things had gone until recently." She told me she'd stayed out of the mess because she thought it would burn itself out. Mom blowing off steam, me cooling down, the usual cycle. But Easter had been different, and what happened after had made it clear this wasn't going away. Then she admitted something that made me sit back. For months before Easter, Mom had been pressuring her to get me to send more money. Not ask, pressure. She told Jenna it was my duty to take care of her because I was better off. And when I shut down the account, Mom wasn't furious because Jenna might struggle. She was furious because it meant she would have to either help financially or admit she wouldn't. I asked the question I'd been holding on to since the call from the kids' program. Did you know she contacted them? Her head snapped up, and she shook it instantly. No, but yeah, that sounds like her. She didn't even have to think about it. Then came the part I think was hardest for her. She said things weren't good. Her job barely covered rent, daycare was taking more than she could afford, and her ex was still months behind on child support. She said she wasn't looking for pity, just telling me where things stood. I sat there stirring a coffee I wasn't even drinking, thinking about all the years I'd helped her because it was the family thing to do. In reality, it had always been Mom's thing, a way to keep me financially tied to her, to make sure she could claim that we take care of our own without lifting a finger herself. The moment I stopped, she turned it into a weapon. I told Jenna I would help again, but only under strict terms. No involvement from Mom or Dad, no passing messages, no letting them know when or how I was helping. This would be between us and only us, and the moment Mom tried to claim any part of it, I'd walk away. Jenna nodded. She didn't argue. She didn't look happy about needing the help, but I could tell she was relieved it was coming without strings from our parents. When I got home, Mark asked how it went. I told him the truth. I'd help Jenna again, but this time because I wanted to, not because Mom decided I had to. I wasn't doing it to keep peace or out of guilt, or because of some imaginary family obligation. I was doing it because my niece deserves stability, and because I could help without letting it be used against us. That was months ago. Jenna and I talk more now, mostly about the kids. She hasn't gone back to being Mom's messenger, and I think she knows that would end everything. My parents still haven't apologized. They still post their vague, self-pitying updates online about losing a child to outside influences and family betrayal. But it doesn't matter anymore. They don't have power over me, over Mark, or over our kids. Helping Jenna now feels different. It's mine, my choice, my terms. And for the first time in years, my parents can't twist it into their story or use it to pull me back under their control. I think that, more than the money, is what they really can't stand. For months, life stayed quiet. No surprise visits, no angry phone calls. The kids stopped asking why Grandma never came around. Jenna was focusing on her daughter, and Mark and I could finally breathe. I thought maybe, just maybe, the storm had passed. Then I got the call. It was a Thursday afternoon. The number wasn't saved in my phone, but the area code was familiar. I answered. It was the front office secretary from my niece's school. She told me my niece had been picked up early twice that week by someone who wasn't listed as an authorized contact. My stomach tightened before she even said the name, my mom. I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked if Jenna had given permission. The secretary said she didn't know, but that my mom had seemed trustworthy and knew all the right details. She told them Jenna was too overwhelmed to make it to pick up, and that she, my mom, was helping until things at home got better. The second I hung up, I called Jenna. She didn't even let me finish before blurting, "She what?" Jenna had no idea it had happened. No warning, no request, nothing. She'd assumed her daughter had just come home from school like normal. She was livid and a little shaken. The next morning, Jenna went straight to the school. The principal admitted my mom had brought in old family photos to prove who she was and had casually dropped my name, saying I knew all about it. Apparently, that was enough to convince them she was acting with permission. That's when Jenna realized this wasn't just meddling anymore. This was an intentional step into her parenting, one that could have spiraled into something much worse. She told them in writing that her mother was not to pick up her daughter under any circumstances. The principal agreed to tighten their sign-out procedures. Then Jenna called Mom. She didn't yell, at least not at first. She told her flat out to stay away from the school, from her daughter, from anything that wasn't explicitly her business. Mom's response? She accused Jenna of turning into me and claimed I'd poisoned her against the family. And just like that, the golden child image cracked. For the next week, I heard from cousins that Mom was furious, telling anyone who would listen that I had turned Jenna against her, just like I had turned Mark against the family. But this time, the story didn't land the way it used to. People had seen my mom's behavior themselves now. The sympathy she'd counted on wasn't there. A couple of relatives even called her out in public comments online. Then one night, Jenna called me. "You were right," she said. "She doesn't help, she controls, and I'm done." She told me she was moving 2 towns over to get her daughter into a better school district and to put physical distance between them and my parents. She wanted a clean break and needed help making it happen. Mark and I didn't even hesitate. We borrowed a moving truck, packed Jenna's apartment in a single weekend, and kept it quiet until she was settled in her new place. No Facebook posts, no group texts, no forwarding address from my mom. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, nothing from my parents. No calls, no surprise visits, no holiday cards. For the kids, just the occasional bitter, cryptic Facebook post about betrayal, but even those are quieter now, smaller. The family is split for good. My kids are thriving without the constant tension. My niece is happier in her new school, already making friends. And Jenna, she's figuring out what life feels like when help doesn't come with strings attached. The last line was crossed without warning. And in the end, the unexpected twist wasn't my mom pulling some final elaborate stunt. It was the one person I thought might always defend her finally walking away too. And that more than anything closed the book on this for good.